You're listening to a Frequency Podcast Network production.
He's in the building!
Drink the moment. Drink it.
I said empty your mind.
Coquettish and coy. Ow. Ow.
What?
And there's people that are dying.
The wickedly talented.
More than great. It was historic.
Crack is world.
Oh, good for you.
I have to apologize.
One of the hottest.
Hello, and welcome back to The Reheat, a podcast that re-examines the hottest celebrity news and scandals of yesteryear and asks, how would we react to the same events if they transpired today? I'm your co-host, Sadaf and
And I'm Sarah Sahagian. This week, we'll be discussing one of the biggest events in sports and pop culture history. On November 7th, 1991, Earvin Johnson, the basketball superstar more commonly known as Magic Johnson, stunned the world by announcing he was HIV positive. What followed would rock the foundation of the sports world and revolutionize the way many Americans saw HIV/AIDS. Before we go deeper into this story, Sadaf, what are your memories of Magic Johnson? Do you remember him as a basketball player? Do you have any memory of his historic announcement?
I was a year old at the time,
We're young.
but I remember him because you can't really forget that name. I remember a lot of posters of him up at school, especially there was a Sports Illustrated cover that I can't forget that I believe was from the late 80s. I do remember hearing about the announcement years later when I was taught what HIV and AIDS was in school, and he was referenced, which I so appreciate in retrospect that we did discuss his involvement. But yeah, otherwise, I've not really known much about Magic Johnson throughout my life, and I feel like I should know more. I feel like we all should, so I'm very excited about this.
I feel like our generation doesn't really appreciate his legacy in many ways the way Gen X and boomers do, because they were just older for it, right? They knew him when he was a basketball superstar, and so it's impossible, I think, to describe how shocking this moment was at the time, but also all the good that came from it. But in order to understand how seismic an event Magic's diagnosis was, it's important to first understand the history of HIV/AIDS in America. So we're going to rewind a little bit. The virus known as HIV/AIDS was first identified in America by the CDC in 1981. Initially, the medical community referred to the illness as, quote, gay cancer, a problematic name that arose because many of the early cases identified in America were found in gay and bisexual men. However, it is worth noting that even in 1981, New York-based pediatric immunologist Dr. Ari Rubenstein had treated 5 Black infants he believed were showing signs of the same immunodeficiencies we now characterize as HIV. But his colleagues dismissed these observations because of the bias that was already so entrenched that this was a gay disease. There was also likely an element of racism here, and the medical community might have been more interested in Rubenstein's discovery if the babies in question had been white.
Not might, definitely.
Mm-hmm. The term AIDS was first used in 1982 and stands for Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome. Scientists were slowly learning more about the way the illness operates. However, widespread homophobia in the U.S. government made it nearly impossible to get funding for AIDS research approved by Congress. President Ronald Reagan's press secretary, Larry Speakes, was caught on tape joking about the virus with reporters and referring to it as, quote, gay plague. During his time in office, which ended in 1989, over 89,000 people would die of HIV/AIDS-related illnesses. Today, many activists and historians believe Reagan's inaction contributed significantly to the high death toll.
I feel like that stigma is still there when you talk about HIV and AIDS. And I think a lot of people are still very uneducated, especially in particular places in the world. And it's so unfortunate because I think it has held us back in terms of actual medical research. If we look at how quickly we've been able to develop vaccines for the COVID-19 pandemic, which, by the way, modeled very similarly to what would help in the AIDS crisis. We still have a blood ban in Canada when it comes to men who have sex with men. And I think that's being upheld for a very specific reason. I don't think it's entirely due to homophobia, but I think it's a key reason it began that way and it's still there.
It's easy to see why the stigma remains when you have policies like a blood ban. And also just the history of HIV/AIDS and the scapegoating of the gay community really does remind me of the scapegoating of Asian diasporas in North America when COVID emerged.
Yeah.
Because no one knew what AIDS was in 1981. And also, as I mentioned, it was present in other populations. It's just that because of homophobia, the medical community wanted it to be a quote unquote gay men's problem. And that was because they wouldn't have to deal with it, right?
Yeah.
There was someone to blame and then there wouldn't be a lot of public pressure to take action. And there wasn't, because Ronald Reagan, he really didn't seem to care about the gay community.
And that's how you see how it's a top-down approach, because if your own government officials and politicians are telling you that I'm not comfortable with this, I'm not going to talk about it, that's why it scares people away. It's like you said, people want somebody to put the blame on, and marginalized communities are always going to be the first target. I think people get very scared, and the fear is reasonable, but when you're lacking in education, how are we going to dispel that fear? It's a really vicious cycle.
And it's, I think, important to note that this can happen, this kind of scapegoating happens even in super educated communities, because the medical community itself, I mean, doctors are some of the most educated people in our society, but when confronted with something they didn't understand, defaulted to prejudice. And I'm not saying every single medical doctor did that, but overwhelmingly the scientific community and the medical community did in the 80s. And so I think we need to, sometimes, I know my educated friends on Twitter can get a little bit smug and elitist and classist, but this can happen in any community and no matter what your education level, and does.
And the stigma exists at all levels of class, unfortunately. And I think that's the saddest part, but there you go.
So now a little bit more background on Magic. He grew up in Lansing, Michigan, the fourth of 7 children. His father was an auto worker. As a youth, Magic himself worked several jobs to help support his family. However, his life changed in 1977 when his high school basketball team won the state championships. It was Earvin Jr.'s extraordinary skill, he was named after his dad, extraordinary skill with the basketball that earned him the nickname Magic as a team.
I didn't know that. How sweet is that?
It is cute. Next, he attended Michigan State, where his skill as a point guard helped lead Michigan to a prestigious NCAA championship title. If, like me, you don't know much about basketball, suffice it to say that the NCAA is the highest level of collegiate sports.
I didn't know that. Thank you, Sarah.
I really didn't until very recently. Magic was drafted by the LA Lakers after only 2 years of university.
Go Magic.
Magic was an incredible player in his own right, but what made him really special was his role as a distributor. Marcel Smith of Bleacher Report referred to Magic as, quote, the greatest teammate ever. When he was on the floor, he made everyone better, including legendary teammates like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I think that in any industry is impressive. The sign of somebody who's truly great is that they make their colleagues greater.
Yeah, I think that's the case in all relationships, right?
Magic's legendary ability as a passer made him a 3-time NBA MVP. That stands for Most Valuable Player.
Thank you.
Apparently, it's a pretty big deal. He also led his team, the LA Lakers, to no less than 5 NBA titles during the 13 seasons he spent with them. His entire career, by the way, he was always a Laker. Again, no small feat to win an NBA title, so doing it 5 times, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm learning
he played
so
good
much.
basketball.
He was amazing, basically.
Yeah. Excellent basketball player.
Just the best.
Magic learned he was HIV positive on October 25th, 1991, and that happened during a fairly routine preseason physical. The first person Magic told was Cookie, the on-off girlfriend of more than a decade, who had finally become his wife just 2 months before. Here's a clip of an interview Cookie Johnson did with Oprah in 2016.
So he comes home. Are you home alone when he comes home?
Well, yeah, I'm home alone, and he finally walks through the door. And at this point, I'm kind of shaking because I'm like, what is it?
Yes.
What could it be?
Yes.
You know? And he came in slowly, and he just, he said, I don't know how else to to tell you. I'm just going to tell you. And I'm like, what? You know, and it's so funny because I literally joked and said, what, you going to tell me you got AIDS or something? You know, I literally joked and said that. And he was like, yeah.
What?
I have HIV, the virus that causes AIDS. And I was just like, oh my God. It was like time stopped. I like froze. You know, I'm standing there looking at him and I couldn't move. And a moment later, like tears are flowing down and I was like, are you sure this is, you know, did they make a mistake? Is it, yeah, you know? And he said, well, I have to go to the doctor tomorrow to double check. Mm-hmm. Well, he said he took a test, so he's waiting, you know, we gotta wait till the test comes back, but I gotta take you tomorrow and get you tested.
Whoa.
Then that was another fear.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, you know, myself. And then I thought, oh my God, I'm pregnant. What about the baby? You know, and it was just like, it took every strength in me to keep standing. And then, you know, and then I just, you know, I don't know, I just grabbed him and I hugged him and, you know, we hugged each other and we just cried together, you know, and it was silence. And then he pulled himself back and he said, you know, you can leave me if you want. I totally understand. I would not want to put you through this. And that's when I was just like, I just kind of like slapped him and said, Are you kidding? No, I love you. We're gonna figure this thing out. We're gonna figure this thing out together.
Happily, Cookie tested negative for HIV and gave birth to a healthy baby, Earvin Johnson III, in June of 1992. When he tested positive, Magic was in excellent health and did not have full-blown AIDS. However, his medical team worried the Lakers' punishing schedule could damage his health, and they advised him to quit the team. So on November 7th, 1991, Magic and his team convened what would become one of the most famous press conferences in history.
Because of the HIV virus that I have attained, I will have to retire from the Lakers today. I just want to make clear, first of all, that I do not have the AIDS disease, because I know a lot of you want to know that, but the HIV virus. My wife is fine. She's negative, so no problem with her. I plan on going on, living for a long time, bugging you guys like I've always have. So you'll see me around. I plan on being with the Lakers in the league. Hopefully David will have me for a while. And going on with my life.
Magic wasn't the first major celebrity to contract the illness. Before him, there was closeted silver screen heartthrob Rock Hudson, a gay man who died tragically in 1984. There was also rock legend Freddie Mercury, who actually died of AIDS-related illnesses the very same month Magic Johnson announced he was HIV positive. But Magic was the first traditionally macho, famously straight celebrity to announce he had contracted the virus, presenting perhaps the first major challenge to homophobic stereotypes about who was vulnerable to the illness. In the early 90s, the stereotype that HIV and AIDS mostly impacted gay men and intravenous drug users remained as strong as ever.
He comes off as so incredibly brave to me because I think another key thing to remember is this was, as you said, at the very beginning, this was at the height of the crisis. And so to speak up and to be someone in that sport, in that industry, which is so masculine and does have its own homophobia to contend with, is massive. I mean, he was standing up in a lot of different ways for a lot of different people. I don't even know if he thought about that at the time. And then for Cookie to stand by him is just incredible. But I also do not blame her for being shocked. I think if your partner comes home and tells you this news, it is a lot to deal with. That's okay to say. It's not an easy thing to swallow. But the fact that they stuck through, I think, imagine her support was so key in just being able to make this announcement. Because like you said, it's just weeks apart. So having that support is just everything. And him getting up there, I mean, my God, he must have been such a role model and such a token of support to so many people who couldn't even voice that at the time.
I know. I think it's really hard for us to fathom looking at this as a historical text, what it must have felt like to live through this, especially for people who are part of the community, especially for people who were HIV positive, to see somebody so famous and so beloved come out and now become a spokesperson for an illness that had been stigmatized and marginalized for so long.
Yeah, especially as a person of color, because, you know, in communities of color, it's harder to talk about illnesses that we're living with our families, with our friends, but then especially on a public platform. So for him to do this, again, speaking for so many people, I can't emphasize it enough how just unbelievably brave this moment was.
It was one of the biggest sports news stories of all time. That's not hyperbole. It made the cover of countless publications, including the New York Times, Time Magazine, the National Enquirer, and Newsweek. The day after Magic's historic announcement, a headline in the LA Times proclaimed the announcement as, quote, the day the magic stopped. But that's not exactly what happened. Magic didn't just challenge the idea that HIV was only a gay men's illness. He also challenged the perception of this diagnosis as a death sentence. Shortly after the press conference, when he announced his HIV-positive status, Magic published a poignant essay in Sports Illustrated. The essay told the story of Magic's diagnosis in beautiful detail. Here's a passage. Suddenly, I felt sick. I was numb, in shock, and yes, I was scared. Dr. Melman quickly told me that I didn't have AIDS, that I was only infected with a virus that could someday lead to the disease. But I didn't really hear him. Like almost everyone else who has not paid attention to the growing AIDS epidemic in the US and the rest of the world, I didn't know the difference between the virus and the disease. While my ears heard HIV positive, my mind heard AIDS. Magic went on to say, I was wrong. 12 days later, after I had undergone a series of tests to verify the insurance company's diagnosis, two of my doctors, Dr. Ho of New York and Dr. Melman, came to my house. It was Wednesday evening, November 6th. With Cookie sitting by my side, the doctor confirmed the original test results. I was indeed a carrier of the AIDS virus, but by then I fully understood that my life wasn't over. More important, Cookie and I also knew that she had tested negative, which meant that, so far, she and the baby were healthy. I still had something to live for. Now, that last part is a little bit tough to read because Magic already had a son from a previous relationship.
Oh.
Andre was born in 1981. So at this point, he had he had a 10-year-old.
Shout out Andre.
Yeah, shout out Andre, who does appear to have a good relationship with his father today.
Oh, well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for him, but, they have worked together. And anyway.
We'll go with that.
Let's go with that.
He's a very strong man, right? I mean, that's his entire image. It's his entire career. So to see someone like that and to know that they were sick in this way and living with this really terrifying disease is a really powerful thing because it shows that, it doesn't have to be a life sentence for anyone. Actually, it can kind of be okay. And there are ways to deal with it and to manage it and to live with it. And for him to also have a child and have a wife and be in this family and carrying on, those are all really powerful signs that, yes, life does go on, actually. But I think I do just appreciate the honesty so much of it. What does it make you feel, Sarah, when you read it?
I mean, I find it very heartening. And what really impresses me is how quickly he did all of this advocacy. I mean, he wrote this essay right after his diagnosis. He didn't take time for himself to process. I understand he wanted to be an advocate, which is fantastic and which is great, but he really didn't have to do it this quickly, which, I mean, I'm just so floored by how he understood that he had this platform and wanted to use it right away to save as many lives as possible. And in a weird way, when I was reading it, it reminded me of how candidly Angelina Jolie has discussed things like her mastectomy.
Yes, I was thinking the same.
Yeah. And I felt like, I was like, oh my God, I think he really paved the way and showed celebrities with these heartfelt essays, you can help save lives. And I mean, I'm sure many people got tested for HIV because of this essay, just like many people got tested for the BRCA1 gene when Angelina Jolie wrote her essay about that. So, I mean, he kicked off an important tradition. And he was also, I mean, he was big in the sports media, which, I mean, is a type of media that often caters towards straight men. And he was showing them this can happen to anyone. And you should also practice safe sex and get tested, right?
Yes.
Like, I don't know how many people had really been telling straight men that before, which is why this was incredibly important.
That's actually such a good point. Because here's the other thing. He's not just speaking to everybody or anyone or you or me. He's speaking to men of a certain age. That's his target demo. Those are his fans. And they range from very young to much older. And they were probably the very last demographic that was being spoken to, not only about safe sex, but about HIV and AIDS and really any kind of health issue, especially in that time period. So he did a service for us all, really. It's really moving. I think I expect so little from men these days. I'm like, wow, magic.
I know he kind of ruins a lot of men for you, right? Like,
he does.
Where you're sort of like, wow, why can't everyone just be like Magic Johnson?
Yeah.
I mean, I love my husband. I think he's great. But
Brandon getting bashed again.
But every ex, like, watch Magic's example, be more like him, emulate Magic Johnson.
Yes, please. This is our new. That's what you guys should be putting on your dating apps. I'm looking for a Magic Johnson.
Exactly. I'm looking for the magic to my cookie.
Oh, I want to make a filthy joke with Magic. But anyway, we'll move on.
Okay. Following the announcement of his diagnosis, rumors began circulating that Magic must have contracted HIV while secretly having sex with men. Washington Post, Newsday, and the LA Times all published articles detailing the gay rumors following the announcement. In a 1992 article from Sporting News, high-profile columnist Dave Kindred questioned the likelihood of Magic's explanation for how he contracted HIV from unprotected heterosexual sex. Quote, numbers say that's unlikely. One study says the odds are 1 in 500 if a man uses no condoms and his partner already has the virus. A man is hundreds of times more likely to acquire HIV by homosexual contact or by using dirty hypodermic needles. However, this Kindred seems to dismiss the fact that in America, heterosexual encounters lead to thousands of new HIV cases annually. The truth is, HIV can and does happen to anyone, regardless of sexual orientation. This is why safe sex is important for all of us.
Amen.
According to Magic and Larry Bird's 2009 co-authored book, When the Game Was Ours, one of the key sources of those gay rumors was Magic's one-time close friend and fellow basketball star, Isaiah Thomas. In his 1992 biography, My Life, Johnson denied the speculation about his sexuality, stating, quote, I have never had a homosexual experience. I'm not gay or bisexual. If I were, I would say so. It's not my style to hide or deny something like that. And it didn't happen through sharing a needle because I've never done drugs. Magic's memoir also got candid about the relationship to sex that did put him at high risk for contracting the HIV virus.
Did it ever even occur to you to use protected sex?
No. I think at that time, it wasn't a thing that everybody even talked about.
Protected sex?
Protected sex, no.
But this is the 80s.
Yeah, the 80s. It was fun time, everybody having sex, unprotected sex. And
with one or more women?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I meant one or more at the same time.
At the same time,
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
He recalls how, in the 1980s, quote, the Lakers were seen as the sexiest and most glamorous team of all. He describes how there were women who would arrive at their hotels waiting to meet the players. He writes, quote, usually the women waiting for us would pretend to be interested in autographs, but you might sign that autograph and write down your room number beside your signature.
Oh.
Or you might write your name and whisper, see you in an hour.
Oh.
Sex in an elevator?
Yeah, different women have different fantasies, and you wanted to make sure they reached their fantasies. That was my thing.
But I mean, you were Magic Johnson.
That's all right. You didn't mind being a daredevil every now and then.
It is important to note that these are Magic's words. There are no interviews with his women that tell us that his speculation that they were all there to sleep with them was true, right? Like, this is kind of, I think, maybe a little bit of projecting. I'm sure some of the people were interested in having sex with the players, but like the assumption that no one just wanted an autograph.
Yeah, I would like cold hard statistics, but I do believe sports have groupies, and that's okay. Yeah. We're not judging you or shaming you. Good for you.
No, we're not judging or shaming.
Imagine if you're just like an innocent person and you're just asking for an autograph and then it has a room number on it.
And you're like, what do I do now? Like,
yeah. It's like waking up to cash on the side table. Like, Jesus.
Studies show that men always overestimate women's sexual interest in them. This is universal.
Wow, what a shock. What a shock.
But I'm sure Magic had a lot of women who were sexually interested in him.
Oh, definitely. So. He's an attractive man, okay?
An attractive man. He was one of the world's greatest basketball players. Yeah. Like,
His name is Magic Johnson. Come on.
In his memoir, Magic makes it clear that he contracted the virus through unprotected heterosexual encounters, but he's also not sure which one. After his diagnosis, he did try to contact as many of his former sexual partners as possible to encourage them to get tested. And fortunately, many of these former partners tested negative. However, in 1992, a woman named Waymar Moore filed a lawsuit against Magic for allegedly passing the virus onto her during a sexual experience, before the basketball star knew he was HIV positive himself. Magic acknowledged sleeping with Waymar Moore, and the suit was settled out of court in 1993, although it was not reported whether or not there was a financial settlement. So we simply don't know.
We can assume so. I feel like anytime it's settled out of court, money was involved. That's my assumption.
All of the speculation about how he got HIV, it actually kind of reminds me of the gross speculation today about how people got COVID, right? Like how when a celebrity comes out with COVID, everyone will be like, they must have gotten it because they went to X party or they did something they weren't supposed to do. So we have not lost this societal tendency to shame people when we hear about an upsetting medical diagnosis.
Great point. Yeah, I think it can be hard sometimes to reserve judgment, but we owe it to people. Let's not be assholes. Let's be a little bit better. Yeah. Have I judged people who I've heard have COVID? A few times, I won't lie. Usually I don't know them that well, so I just make an assumption. But yeah, it's not fair. It's not fair. If we're honestly speaking about it, it's not. And I think we owe that to him and we owe that to everybody else who was living with us. Because I think it's part of the reason so many people didn't actually, A, want to get tested and B, want to talk about it because then they face the judgment of other people. It makes you even more afraid. And that literally led to deaths. So that's not a good solution either.
Yeah, we had this for so long. My memories of HIV when I was a child and seeing news stories about HIV and AIDS, like the media depicted like there was the good type of HIV patient who had probably gotten HIV through tainted blood.
Yeah.
And then there was everyone else who was othered by the media. And the suggestion was that they brought this on themselves, which is not true at all. That's victim blaming and it's disgusting. And the truth is we should just be investigating cures and treatments. But there was this narrative that some people were to blame and you shouldn't feel sorry for them. And then other people like, Elizabeth Glaser were heroes and victims.
There's no good victims. There's no bad victims. Retire that.
Absolutely. No one deserves an illness that changes the entire course of your life.
No.
Well, I think it's time for a short halftime break. When we return, we'll discuss Magic's triumphant return to the court. Despite retiring from the Lakers, Magic quickly found a treatment regimen that kept him strong and healthy. One of the people Magic cites as helping him find the drug cocktail he believes saved his life is actually Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Hey!
Yes, that Anthony Fauci.
Can I just say something? Anthony Fauci is a very attractive man, and particularly so when he was younger. I love hearing that these two teamed up back then. Oh,
Anthony Fauci gives me Stanley Tucci vibes.
Yes!
Like, yeah, he's kind of sexy in a similar way. And I would watch a Magic Johnson and Anthony Fauci buddy movie.
I would love that.
Let's write that screenplay, Sadaf. Let's write that screenplay.
Absolutely. It'll be straight to streaming, but I'm down. Let's do it.
Ultimately, Magic was able to play in the 1992 Olympics as part of the legendary Dream Team. That's how healthy he was, which included an impossibly large pool of basketball greats like Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, and Magic's good friend, Larry Bird. They were kind of frenemies, but also besties. Like, they have an interesting relationship that we could do an entire episode on if I knew more about basketball.
I'd love to hear about it. I love a good feud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I wouldn't say I guess at certain points they had a feud. I don't know about basketball to assess that, but they definitely by the end were friends, and they're good friends today. When the Barcelona Olympics began, opposing teams were universally overwhelmed by the Dream Team, losing to America by an average of 43.8 points per game. Naturally, the Dream Team went home with gold.
And then there was the golden moment. Johnson's role as captain of the U.S. Olympic basketball team. Looking back on it now, what does being part of the dream team mean to you?
I know my son was special. I know getting married was special. But that was right behind both of them.
According to Sports Illustrated, the Dream Team is, quote, arguably the most dominant squad ever assembled in any sport. So that's pretty impressive.
That's amazing.
Buoyed by his performance at the 1992 Olympics, Magic attempted an NBA comeback with the Lakers that very same year. The attempt was unfortunately short-lived as some players remained fearful about playing with Magic due to his condition. Here's his former teammate, Karl Malone, discussing his own hesitancy, or to put it more bluntly, his ignorance.
If I get in a collision with a guy, it don't have to be Magic. It can be Joe Smo. But the fact of the matter is, if you got the AIDS virus, it'll be hard for me to play as hard as I'm capable of playing. And if people can't respect my decision, that's tough.
In one notable incident, Magic received a small cut on his arm during a preseason game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the other players looked noticeably fearful while the tiny wound was being bandaged on the sideline. The constant fixation on his illness wore on Magic, eventually leading him to abandon the comeback altogether. Here he is discussing the controversy on ABC Primetime Live in 1992.
So I was there at my hotel that night. I was thinking, I said, between this and all the criticism, it's just too much. It's going to happen all year long. It's great. Whether I get cut or somebody else, boom, there's that panic, there's that fear.
Magic returned to the Lakers as a coach in 1994, but it had never been his dream to coach, and he eventually quit. Magic did, however, buy a 5% stake in the Lakers and briefly returned as a player for a single season in 1996. While Johnson's team was grateful for the, on average, 14.6 points per game he scored, the NBA was not universally welcoming of his comeback. Stigma and ignorance surrounding HIV remained prevalent throughout the 90s. People weren't really sure how you got HIV/AIDS or what put you at significant risk. And you can really see that in comments like what Malone was saying, right? Like you can see that ignorance there.
Yeah.
However, Magic also had his defenders like Dennis Rodman, a person who, I mean, he's controversial, but I like what he says.
I enjoy Dennis Rodman. Future episode.
All right, let's do one on him. So his comments about Magic, I mean, he says that his reaction to Magic coming back was, I don't give a damn. I just want to play. I don't give a damn if he got that. So, like, you know, that's a good attitude. Like, just, I want to do my job.
Yeah.
I don't care. Like, you know, it is what it is. And I'm not going to fear him and I'm not going to discriminate against him. So good on Dennis.
You know why? Because he's not going to affect him in any way. Nobody has to give a shit about what anyone is dealing with if it is not going to affect you. I mean, it's really just a beautiful, simple statement that applies to so much.
Absolutely. It seems like Dennis Rodman was a bit better informed about HIV/AIDS and how one contracts the virus than maybe some other players were.
I mean, don't forget, this was also the time, I remember when I was in school that the rumor went that if you touched your bare ass on a public toilet seat, you would get AIDS. Like, I remember that being the running. It wasn't even a joke. It was so many people actually legitimately believed that. And it's so insidious, especially when you're that age, and then you'll just believe what you hear and then you run with it and then you tell everybody else. Let's just not let that keep going. Educate yourself, educate your children, educate your family, for God's sake.
In the mid-90s, Magic's personal life was also on fire. His marriage remained strong. In fact, Cookie and Magic expanded their family, adopting a daughter named Elisa. Throughout the 80s and 90s, we were so used to seeing images of people ravaged by HIV/AIDS. And I think what's so valuable about somebody like Magic showing, like, you can be an Olympic gold medalist and be HIV positive is it really refuted the idea that HIV was sort of a lost cause, right? Like there, I think in the 80s and 90s was this belief that there was nothing we could really do to help people with HIV/AIDS, that eventually and in not very much time, they would die. And that wasn't true. Science was making breakthroughs fairly quickly, but the stigma lingered, and having Magic show you that if you get treatment, you can have a fantastic and fulfilling life probably inspired a lot of people to get tested and then to follow their treatment regimens and to live wonderful, fulfilling lives. And I think one of the coolest things that happened with the Dream Team wasn't just that you saw Magic was healthy and vibrant and strong, but also you saw some of the most famous athletes in the world working with him. Like he was passing them the ball and they were taking it from him. You saw that they were not afraid. And athletes are role models for kids. They're role models for grown people in many cases. And seeing somebody like a Michael Jordan, an athlete that many revere as a god, like that's not hyperbole.
No.
Many people revere him as a god. Seeing him take a ball from Magic Johnson, I think told everyone, like, you should not be shunning people who are HIV positive in your community. Like that is in and of itself a very powerful thing to see.
Yeah.
Well, Magic also honored his promise to continue his advocacy. One memorable example was when Magic hosted a special on the subject geared at children and teens for Nickelodeon in March of 1992. Here he is in that special, consoling a little girl who was herself HIV positive.
Oh, you don't have to cry. You don't have to cry. Because we are normal people, okay? We are. And you just want to be treated like that, right? You just want your friends to play with you and call you up and come by and still have sleepovers and things like that, right? Yes. And it's okay to cry. It's okay to cry.
It's also amazing how candid this special gets. And they're like 9-year-olds on stage and they're talking about safe sex. Like it's fantastic.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. Sir, it's making me angry.
I know.
I know.
Nickelodeon in the 90s was progressive as fuck. Why can't it be like that today?
Seriously.
The special educated kids about condoms and safe sex, but it also taught them how hurtful it is to ostracize people living with HIV and AIDS, and why people living with this health condition are as worthy of love and respect as anyone else. In 2003, Magic became a spokesperson for an antiretroviral drug called Combivir. The ads were targeted at the Black community. At the time, AIDS was the leading cause of death for Black people between the ages of 24 and 44 in America. This career step is challenging because while it was important to encourage Black HIV-positive patients to take life-saving antiretroviral drugs, this was also not a purely humanitarian act. Magic was still being paid, and these drugs were, we should say, prohibitively expensive for many people.
Yeah.
And that's true of many life-saving drugs in America. That's not unique to this specific drug. While as a company, Combivir was not without problematic elements, this sort of endorsement deal is, I have to say, still much more helpful to the world than Matt Damon trying to convince you to buy cryptocurrency. So, like, I don't want to be too critical of Magic here. Like, encouraging people in the Black community to take antiretroviral drugs, even if they are so expensive that some people can't afford them, is better than being like, buy Bitcoin.
We don't want any NFTs. But from anyone.
No, exactly. Exactly. If you're going to take an endorsement deal, like this is better than a lot of celebrity endorsement deals, frankly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Magic retired permanently from basketball in 1996, but he didn't retire from working. Magic became the chairman and CEO of Magic Johnson Enterprises, a company that specializes in urban America, specifically building businesses in areas with sizable Black and Latinx populations. Magic also became the only franchisee in the history of coffee chain Starbucks, and while it pains me to admit it, I fucking love Starbucks.
Oh, I do too. I hate to say it. Exorbitantly expensive.
It's super expensive and it's not cool, but man, those cake pops are good. He bought and eventually sold 125 Starbucks stores. So good investment, Magic.
I didn't know that. What an entrepreneur. Look at that.
I know, he's the only franchisee in their history. So like he's good at business, this guy. Good at basketball, good at business.
Yeah.
Both those things are understatements. Like excellent at basketball, excellent at business.
What a good man. Just a good man.
Citing the considerable spending power of often overlooked Black and Latinx communities, Magic has said, "We proved that retailers and companies could make money in urban America." Thanks to his investing practices, Magic Johnson's estimated net worth today is around $700 million.
Holy shit. Good for him. My God.
He has the Midas touch. So let's discuss why it's so important for people from racialized communities to create businesses for those communities and not just leave the economic growth to white VC guys from New York and Silicon Valley. Because this is what was happening here. You have somebody who, had startup capital, who was able to see that these communities were being underserved, and he brought businesses that really resonated with those communities and actually, people quite liked.
Yeah, and nobody can communicate to a person of color the way another person of color can. It's a different culture, it's a different language, it's a different understanding. And it's also part of the reason that there is still so much systemic racism in the healthcare system, because a lot of healthcare workers are still white and they don't quite know how to communicate to patients of color. Yeah, I just think it's so important to have people who look like you speak to you and to be able to give back to their community. I also think that it's actually kind of our responsibility as people of color to give back in that same way once you find success. Some people might not agree with me on that, but I really do think it's important, especially when you're someone who has a $700 million net worth. I mean, come on. And clearly he really cared. I mean, he wanted to do this. This was his entire brand. And I just love that he was so invested and interested in this to begin with.
I mean, Magic has spent his whole career living life without limits. And he's still doing that today because he continues to thrive. He remains committed to regular and intense workouts. In 2021, a video of Magic doing bicep curls while vacationing on his yacht went viral.
Ooh, that sounds like pornography. Oh my.
I know. He's always fabulous. Like, if you want aspirational content, follow Magic Johnson.
We're okay with Magic having a yacht, okay? Like, he can even have a private jet if he wants to. It's fine. It's fine. Well, for me anyway, I speak personally.
I'm okay with it. I don't want any other celebrities to do that because they are terrible for the environment, but I'll make an exception for Magic. He's also a vocal proponent for COVID vaccines, encouraging his fans to get their shots, which I love about him. I think he's fantastic, and he's very critical of disinformation, and he wants people to know that COVID vaccines save lives, which they do. Amen, Magic. Amen.
Yeah, so important. So important.
Magic's family also seems to be doing great. His first son, Andre, grew up to work for his father's business.
Go Andre. We love Andre.
I'm pro Andre. Like, I'm happy
I'm so pro Andre
that he went into the family business and it seems to be going well for him. Earvin III, who is today known as EJ, has become a queer fashion icon. The former Rich Kids of Beverly Hills star is known for choosing gender-flexible clothing options and has been known to step out in gorgeous ball gowns.
Love, can I just say love Rich Kids of Beverly Hills. Highly recommend.
Great show. And honestly, EJ is so witty. Like, this guy is, like, he inherited his dad's charm. Like, he is charm personified.
He did.
As an avowed lover of makeup, EJ is also a proud advocate for the male beauty movement. For her part, Elisa Johnson is an up-and-coming eyewear designer. In addition, she has a legion of devoted followers on Instagram. Aww. All of his kids are thriving. It's so nice to see.
I love to hear it. So nice.
Yeah, it's lovely. And Cookie?
Oh, I've been dying to hear about Cookie.
She's an accomplished professional woman in her own right. I mean, who could forget Cookie Johnson's iconic jeans? Together with Magic, she also founded the Magic Johnson Foundation. According to its website, the foundation, quote, develops programs and supports community-based organizations that address the educational, health, and social needs of ethnically diverse urban communities. Cookie and Magic have been happily married for over 3 decades.
Oh my God, 3 decades.
I know. This is a happy ending, right? Like,
yeah.
They're such an aspirational couple. Just the idea of 2 months into your marriage, getting this diagnosis that no one in your society really understands at that point.
Yeah.
And coming out the other side and having this gorgeous family where everyone seems to be living their true self and living their best life. Like, oh my God, just, we should all be this lucky.
So aspirational.
Well, I think it's time for Hindsight is 2022, the segment where Sadaf and I discuss what we might have done differently if we were the subjects of today's episode.
I shouldn't have done that.
So what would you have done differently, Sadaf?
I don't know if there is anything, because I think one thing that's been so fascinating about Magic's journey is he's taken a pretty brave and amazing step every moment of his journey. And I'm very curious, and don't hate me for saying this, but I would love to know who was on his sort of press team and who was kind of helping him calculate each move, because I'm sorry, but these moves are calculated, except this is a great example of when it has a very positive result and it leads to change and is a very good thing. But yeah, I love the way that he handled everything. I just wish that when this all happened, people had been a little bit more educated. And I do wish people were more educated even today. I know way too many people in my life who still don't know a lot about HIV and AIDS. And one thing I do want to insist is that if you don't know, please go Google it. It's actually not that complicated to understand or learn. And I think, especially if you're in Canada, you should read up on the tainted blood scandal of the 80s, which also spiked a lot of homophobia and will help you understand Magic's journey a little bit more. But yeah, we need advocates, and we need advocates of color. And I will always just fucking love Magic for being that guy. And I wish we had more even today. What about you, Sarah? What kind of stands out to you?
I think Magic is great. I think Cookie is great. I think these people are true heroes. The person who I fault is Ronald Reagan. He's from the very beginning of the episode. In the preamble, we talk about how Reagan's America is what contributed to this being such a seismic event, right? Part of the fact that his administration furthered homophobia and really othered and stigmatized this illness. Like, HIV/AIDS had been around, had been identified in America for a decade when Magic came out as HIV-positive. And that was such a wasted opportunity, because if you'd had a more humane approach to this illness, by then there probably would have been more acceptance, right? Like if there had been public health campaigns that told people that you shouldn't discriminate against people for being HIV positive, if there had been more research into treatments, if Congress had actually funded that, this could have been a different moment. I still think it would have been a big news story. But honestly, the fact that Reagan did this and was such a poor leader put such a huge responsibility on Magic's shoulders, where he suddenly had to be an advocate for HIV/AIDS. And so much of the burden of destigmatizing this illness was on his shoulders. And he handled this gracefully, but that never should have been his burden. It never should have. That was the job of America's political leadership. And they completely neglected their responsibilities and they just abdicated their responsibilities and then handed them on to celebrities. And luckily you had Magic Johnson. Luckily he took that role on and he was up to that role. But honestly, this never should have been a problem for him to solve.
No. And I do want to say, because I did make that point earlier, that it's important for celebrities to take platforms. And as you said, that should really be the second step, because it's our politicians and it's our healthcare workers who are the ones who should be taking those stances. That is actually their whole job. And then we can turn to public figures whose job it is not actually to be the ones to remind us that actually, yes, here, blah, 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 so wear masks, get vaccinated. It's sad because this was 30, 40 years ago, and we're looking at COVID now and we're seeing how so many things have not changed in terms of how we respond to mass illness and also how we shame each other. And it's all kind of sad, but on an optimistic point, I'm so glad that we do have people who are always going to be brave and confident enough to stand up and be the face of something like this, even when they don't have to.
Vote carefully. That's important. If you're in Canada right now, you know what I mean.
And don't listen to Joe Rogan. And that is all.
Yep. That is all. This brings us to the end of this week's episode. Now in his 60s, Magic proves that for those who have access to the right medication and a great medical team, life with HIV/AIDS can be healthy, active, and joyful. It's heartening to know that one of the most shocking sports news events of the 90s has a truly happy ending.
Well, as always, we hope you'll be back next week. And if you want to hear more from me, you can find me on Twitter at @_SadafAsan. Sarah, where can our listeners find you?
Listeners can find me at Sarah Zahagian. And if you like the podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe so other listeners can find us too. Thanks for listening.